She got pregnant for her friend's husband thinking he was rich, only to find out that her friend is the breadwinner. Amanda thought she had orchestrated the perfect heist. She had seduced her friend's wealthy husband, gotten pregnant with his child, and was ready to claim her prize, a life of luxury she'd always craved. But when Tola finally kicked Kenny out of their mansion, Amanda stood in the doorway of a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Ikate, staring at peeling paint and cracked tiles, while one devastating truth crashed down on her like a tidal wave. The man she'd stolen, the man she'd sacrificed her friendship for, the man whose child now grew in her belly, wasn't the breadwinner at all. And by the time she discovered the truth, it was already far too late. Amanda's childhood had been a masterclass in survival and deception. Growing up in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Lagos, she watched her mother navigate life as the other woman, always waiting for phone calls from married men, always receiving gifts wrapped in secrecy and shame. Her mother never apologized for her choices. Instead, she taught Amanda that love was a luxury poor women couldn't afford, but security was something they could steal. By the time Amanda turned 16, she had internalized her mother's philosophy completely. Single men her age seemed foolish and broke, fumbling through life with empty pockets and empty promises. But married men, her mother insisted, those were the ones who knew how to treat a woman. They had already been trained. They understood that affection came with a price tag, and they were willing to pay it. Amanda had almost forgotten about Tola until that Saturday afternoon at the boutique in Victoria Island. She was browsing through discounted handbags when she heard a familiar laugh, bright and infectious, cutting through the store's ambient music. Turning around, Amanda saw her former university friend. But this wasn't the struggling student she remembered. Tola stood near the luxury section, her skin glowing, her outfit effortlessly expensive, while a tall, handsome man stood beside her, casually pointing at items without checking price tags. Their reunion was warm and enthusiastic. Tola introduced Kenny, her husband of 3 years, and Amanda played her part perfectly, gushing about how wonderful it was to reconnect, carefully concealing the calculations already forming in her mind. She watched Kenny pull out a black credit card to pay for 6 shopping bags filled with designer items, and something predatory awakened inside her. This was exactly the kind of man she'd been searching for. But here's what Amanda didn't know. When Tola's invitation arrived 2 weeks later, Amanda accepted immediately. She spent hours choosing her outfit, something attractive but not obvious, friendly but subtly seductive. The house in Ikoyi exceeded every expectation. The gate alone looked like it cost more than Amanda's annual rent. As she drove through the compound, she counted 3 luxury cars parked in the driveway, each one gleaming under the afternoon sun. The interior was even more impressive. Marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting light from crystal chandeliers. Original artwork hung on walls painted in sophisticated neutral tones. Every piece of furniture whispered wealth. When Tola led her upstairs to the master suite and opened her walk-in closet, Amanda felt her knees weaken. Designer bags lined shelves like books in a library. Shoes worth thousands of dollars stood in perfect rows. Jewelry sparkled from velvet-lined drawers. Amanda's voice trembled slightly as she asked the question burning in her throat. How did they afford all this? Tola's answer seemed straightforward. Kenny was a structural engineering consultant, she explained, working on major construction projects across Lagos. His monthly income was substantial. Amanda absorbed this information like a sponge, never noticing the slight smile playing at the corners of Tola's lips. And this is where Amanda made her first critical mistake. The grocery store encounter 2 days later seemed like fate, but Amanda had actually been stalking Kenny's routine. She knew which stores he frequented, which gym he attended, where he got his hair cut. Their conversation was brief but loaded with unspoken possibilities. Kenny wasn't stupid. He recognized the look in Amanda's eyes, that particular hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with what his perceived wealth could provide. The text message Amanda sent that evening was carefully crafted, thanking him for paying for her groceries, mentioning how kind he was, how different from most men. Kenny responded within minutes. Their text conversations grew longer, more frequent, more intimate. Within 3 weeks, they had crossed every boundary that should have been sacred. Kenny took Amanda to expensive restaurants in distant parts of the city where he wouldn't be recognized. He bought her bags, shoes, perfume, anything she admired even briefly. Amanda felt triumphant. She had finally found her mark, the married man who would elevate her life. She fantasized about eventually replacing Tola, becoming the woman who lived in that mansion, wore those clothes, drove those cars. The fact that Tola considered her a friend barely registered as a concern. Friendship, Amanda had learned from her mother, was another luxury poor women couldn't afford. The evening Amanda cooked dinner at Tola's house marked the apex of her audacity. She had offered to prepare a special meal as a gesture of friendship, and Tola, still unaware of the affair, had accepted gratefully. While Tola worked late in her home office, finishing designs for a major commercial project, Amanda and Kenny moved freely through the house like it belonged to them. In the living room, while the aroma of jollof rice and fried plantains drifted from the kitchen, they had sex on the same couch where Tola watched television every evening. The thrill of the forbidden location intensified everything. Afterward, they laughed quietly about Tola's obliviousness. Amanda called her friend naive, foolish, too trusting. Kenny agreed, adding that his wife was so focused on work that she barely noticed anything happening in her own home. When Tola emerged from her office, tired and hungry, Amanda greeted her with a bright smile and served her dinner like a devoted friend. They ate together, all three of them, laughing and telling stories while Amanda's betrayal sat invisible at the table like a fourth guest. That night, after Amanda left, Kenny and Tola went to bed, and he held his wife while thinking about another woman. But Tola wasn't as oblivious as they believed. The next morning arrived like any other. Kenny showered while Tola pretended to sleep, watching him through barely opened eyes. She had noticed the changes in recent months. The distance. The coldness. The condoms appearing in pockets of pants she sent to the laundry. The mysterious charges on credit cards she paid for. Tola wasn't naive. She was strategic, waiting for the right moment to confirm her suspicions. When the bathroom door closed and water began running, Tola moved quickly. She had watched Kenny type his password enough times to memorize it. His phone unlocked easily. The notification from Sweet in the Middle Mandy sat at the top of his messages. Tola's hands remained steady as she read through weeks of conversations. The pet names. The explicit messages. The planning of secret meetings. Then she found the messages from the previous night. Amanda describing how exciting it was to have sex in Tola's living room while she cooked. Kenny calling his wife foolish, saying she was so consumed with work that she deserved to be cheated on. Amanda suggesting they had done Tola a favor by keeping her company. They mocked her dedication to her career, her trust, her friendship. Tola read every word with clinical detachment, taking screenshots, saving evidence. When Kenny emerged from the shower, she was back in bed, phone in her hand, scrolling through social media like nothing had happened. She smiled at him, wished him a good day, kissed his cheek. Kenny left for his usual routine of gym and leisure, funded entirely by his wife's income, completely unaware that his comfortable life had just entered its final chapter. And here's where Tola's true genius reveals itself. Amanda's missed period arrived right on schedule. She had stopped taking her birth control pills 6 weeks earlier, a calculated decision to trap Kenny permanently. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, and Amanda felt like she'd won the lottery. This was her golden ticket, the insurance policy that would guarantee her access to Kenny's wealth forever. She imagined Tola's face when she learned the news, pictured the divorce that would inevitably follow, fantasized about moving into that mansion as Kenny's new wife. She told Kenny over dinner at an expensive restaurant in Lekki. His reaction was less enthusiastic than she'd hoped, but Amanda attributed that to shock. Men always panicked initially about unplanned pregnancies, she reasoned. Once the reality settled in, he would embrace his role as a father and do the right thing. She had watched enough Nollywood movies to know how these situations typically resolved. The other woman won. The wife got discarded. The man chose his new family. Meanwhile, Tola had begun implementing her plan with surgical precision. The first move was subtle. She stopped Kenny's monthly allowance. For 3 years, she had been transferring 200,000 naira into his account every month. Money he spent on gym memberships, clothes, haircuts, outings with friends, and apparently, his mistress. When the transfer didn't arrive, Kenny assumed it was a banking error. Tola confirmed this lie with a concerned expression, promising to visit the bank soon. The second month, when no money appeared again, Kenny grew anxious. He asked Tola about it repeatedly. She told him the bank was investigating some suspicious activity on their joint account, that these things took time, that he needed to be patient. Kenny believed her because he always believed her. His entire life was built on believing whatever Tola told him. Now watch how quickly everything unravels. The evening Tola invited both Kenny and Amanda to the house. Neither of them suspected anything. Kenny thought it was a normal dinner. Amanda assumed Tola wanted to spend time with her friend. They arrived separately, maintaining the illusion of propriety. Tola served drinks, made small talk, smiled warmly. Then she excused herself briefly and returned carrying a folder. She placed it on the coffee table and asked them both to sit down. The folder contained printed screenshots of every message they had exchanged. Photos of them together at restaurants. Credit card statements showing purchases Kenny had made for Amanda using cards tied to Tola's accounts. Bank transfers from Tola's business account that funded Kenny's entire lifestyle. Employment records showing that Kenny hadn't held a job in 4 years. Property documents proving Tola owned the house, the cars, everything. Amanda's face drained of color as Tola spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the evidence of their affair and the financial reality of their situation. Kenny was not a structural engineering consultant. Kenny was not a breadwinner. Kenny was unemployed. Every luxury item Amanda had admired, every expensive dinner, every shopping spree, had been funded by Tola's career as an actual structural engineer earning over $10,000 monthly from international contracts. Amanda tried to argue, to deny, but Tola simply handed her bank statements and business documents. The numbers didn't lie. Tola had built everything from nothing while Kenny contributed nothing but his presence. She had loved him enough to allow him the dignity of appearing successful, giving him access to her cars, her money, her credit cards, maintaining the fiction that he was providing for their household. But that arrangement, Tola explained with chilling calm, was now terminated. And here's where it gets really interesting. Tola's instructions were clear and non-negotiable. Kenny had 1 hour to pack his clothes and leave. He couldn't take any electronics because she had purchased all of them. He couldn't take any jewelry because every piece had been a gift from her. The cars remained because they were registered in her name. The credit cards were already cancelled. His access to her bank accounts was revoked. He was leaving with exactly what he had brought into the marriage 3 years earlier, which was essentially nothing. Kenny tried reasoning with her, then begging, then threatening. Nothing moved Tola. She had already consulted lawyers, documented everything, protected her assets. Amanda sat frozen on the couch, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach, reality crashing over her in waves. This couldn't be happening. The mansion, the luxury, the wealth she had coveted so desperately, none of it belonged to Kenny. She had stolen a man who owned nothing. When Kenny mentioned the apartment he had rented in Ikate as their new home, Amanda's heart sank further. She had assumed he meant he was getting a new mansion, another grand residence befitting his status. But Kenny clarified with bitter resignation that he had used his last savings, money from his final monthly allowance from Tola, to rent a modest 2-bedroom flat. It was all he could afford. Tola watched them leave together, Kenny carrying 2 suitcases of clothes, Amanda stumbling behind him in shock. She didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. She felt tired and sad that her marriage had ended this way, but she refused to be disrespected in her own home, funding the lifestyle of a cheating husband and his conniving mistress. Now here's where Amanda's real nightmare begins. The apartment in Ikate was everything Amanda had feared and worse. The building was old, its paint peeling in long strips. The neighborhood was crowded and noisy. Inside, the 2-bedroom flat felt suffocatingly small after the mansion's spacious rooms. The furniture Kenny had managed to acquire was minimal and cheap. There was no generator, so they suffered through Lagos's frequent power outages. The single air conditioning unit barely worked. Amanda's pregnancy progressed, and with it came expensive medical needs. Kenny had no money for prenatal care, nutritious food, or the vitamins her doctor prescribed. She visited a pharmacy to price abortion pills, thinking she could end the pregnancy and escape this nightmare, but the doctor warned her about complications. Her body had already been through multiple abortions in her younger years. Another one might leave her unable to have children at all. So Amanda was trapped, carrying the child of a man who couldn't even afford to feed her properly. Kenny spent his days sending out resumes that went unanswered, scrolling through his phone, sleeping until afternoon. His unemployment wasn't recent. He had been let go from his last engineering job 5 years earlier due to poor performance and had simply never managed to secure another position. Tola had supported him throughout their entire marriage, believing that love meant carrying someone through their difficult season. Amanda tried reaching out to old contacts, men she had dated before, but word of her pregnancy had spread. Nobody wanted to inherit another man's responsibility. Her friends from university had distanced themselves after hearing she had betrayed Tola. Her mother, when Amanda finally called her in desperation, laughed bitterly and said she had taught her daughter to choose wealthier targets. 3 months into living together, Amanda and Kenny's relationship had deteriorated completely. The romance evaporated when poverty became their daily reality. Kenny resented Amanda for pushing him to leave Tola, as if he hadn't been an enthusiastic participant in the affair. Amanda despised Kenny for being broke, as if his financial situation was new information rather than something she had failed to investigate. They fought constantly. About money they didn't have. About food they couldn't afford. About the baby neither of them felt prepared to raise. Amanda's pregnancy made her emotional and hungry, but their budget barely covered basic necessities. She found herself eating Gary and groundnuts, the same poverty meals from her childhood that she had sworn never to eat again. The irony was devastating. Kenny eventually found work as a site supervisor for a small construction company, but the salary was barely 100,000 naira monthly, less than a quarter of what Tola used to give him as allowance. After rent, utilities, and transportation, almost nothing remained. Amanda, now 6 months pregnant and showing, couldn't work even if anyone would hire her. She stayed in the hot apartment all day, scrolling through Tola's social media, watching her former friend travel internationally for work conferences, post photos of beautiful hotel rooms and gourmet meals. Tola had moved on completely. She had blocked both Kenny and Amanda on all personal accounts, but her professional profiles remained public, chronicling her success. She had recently been featured in a business magazine as one of Lagos's top female engineers. The article mentioned her recent divorce but focused primarily on her impressive portfolio of projects and her net worth. And then something happened that changed everything again. 7 months into Amanda's pregnancy, someone knocked on their apartment door on a Saturday afternoon. Kenny was at work. Amanda, heavy and tired, dragged herself to answer it. Standing in the corridor was a woman she didn't recognize, elegantly dressed, probably in her early 60s. The woman asked if she could come inside. Something about her authoritative presence made Amanda step aside. The woman introduced herself as Kenny's mother. Amanda had never met her because Kenny claimed they were estranged. But recent events had prompted her to reach out. She had heard about the divorce from relatives who still spoke to Kenny. She had learned about Amanda and the pregnancy. And she had information that she believed Amanda deserved to know. Kenny's mother explained that her son had always been lazy, even as a child. He had barely graduated university. His brief engineering career had ended because he couldn't be bothered to show up consistently or complete assignments. When he met Tola, Kenny's mother had been relieved, hoping marriage might mature him. Instead, he had simply found someone willing to enable his lack of ambition. But that wasn't the devastating revelation. Kenny's mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost sympathetic. She told Amanda that Kenny had another child, a 4-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. The mother was a woman Kenny had dated before Tola. He had abandoned them both when Tola came into his life with her money and stability. He sent no child support. He never visited. His daughter didn't even know his name. Amanda felt the room spinning. The man she had stolen, the man whose child grew inside her, had already proven himself capable of abandoning his own flesh and blood. What made her think she would be different? Kenny's mother left after an hour, but her words echoed endlessly in Amanda's mind. That evening, when Kenny returned from work, Amanda confronted him about his daughter. He initially denied it, then admitted it casually, as if abandoning a child was a minor oversight. He claimed the mother was crazy and demanding. He insisted Tola never knew. He promised Amanda that their situation would be different. But Amanda finally saw clearly what she had been too greedy to notice before. Kenny wasn't a prize. He was a parasite. He had attached himself to Tola's success, drained her emotionally and financially, and when caught, had simply looked for his next host. Amanda had thought she was stealing a wealthy man, but she had actually stolen a liability. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder of the permanent connection she now had to Kenny. Amanda placed both hands on her swollen belly and felt something close to despair. She had destroyed a friendship for this. She had schemed and seduced and betrayed for this. She had gotten pregnant deliberately for this. And now she was trapped in a cramped apartment with a man who couldn't provide, wouldn't change, and had a documented history of abandoning his children. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Amanda opened it, and her breath caught. It was Tola. The message was brief. The baby is innocent. Come to my office Monday at noon. Don't tell Kenny. Amanda stared at those words for hours, turning them over in her mind. Was this a trap? An olive branch? Another confrontation? She had no idea what Tola wanted, but desperation made the decision easy. She would go. Monday arrived cold and grey, unusual for Lagos. Amanda told Kenny she had a prenatal appointment and left the apartment early. She wore her best maternity outfit, though it was worn and cheap compared to the designer clothes Tola used to wear. The office building in Victoria Island gleamed with glass and steel. Tola's engineering firm occupied the entire 10th floor. The receptionist seemed to expect her, directing Amanda to a private conference room. She waited there for 15 minutes, her heart pounding, her baby moving restlessly. Then the door opened, and Tola walked in, looking successful and composed in a perfectly tailored suit. She sat across from Amanda, and for a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Tola slid a folder across the table. Amanda opened it with shaking hands. Inside were legal documents. A contract of some kind. Amanda's eyes scanned the pages, trying to understand. Words jumped out at her: custody arrangement, financial support, living expenses, educational trust fund, medical care, supervised visitation. Tola spoke, her voice steady and businesslike. She explained that despite everything Amanda had done, despite the betrayal and the lies, the baby growing inside her was innocent. Tola had spent weeks consulting with lawyers and therapists, working through her own anger and hurt, and she had reached a decision. She was willing to provide comprehensive support for the child, but there were conditions. Conditions that would change Amanda's life forever. Amanda looked up from the documents, her mind reeling, trying to process what Tola was offering and what it might cost her. Before she could speak, before she could ask any of the 1,000 questions flooding her brain, Tola stood up and delivered one final statement that made Amanda's blood run cold. There's something else you need to know about Kenny. Something his mother probably didn't tell you. Something that will make you understand why I'm offering you this deal. But before I tell you, I need to know if you're willing to accept my terms. Amanda sat frozen, the unsigned contract in her hands, her future hanging in the balance, while Tola waited for an answer that would determine everything that came next.